I was 52 years old the day I sold my Land Rover. Not because I needed the money for a holiday or a new car or anything sensible like that. I sold it because my business had just collapsed, and $20,000 in cash was the only clear thing standing between me and starting completely over. I'd spent nearly 15 years importing furniture between Australia and Indonesia. It was steady work, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills, put my first marriage's mortgage payments on the table every month, kept the lights on, until it didn't. A bigger competitor undercut our prices, two of our biggest clients went under in the same financial year, and within 18 months, a business I'd spent a decade and a half building was gone. I remember sitting in my empty warehouse on the last day, keys in my hand, waiting for the real estate agent to arrive and lock up behind me. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. And the thought that kept circling was the same one a lot of men my age think in that exact moment. What now? I could rebuild the same life, in the same place, chasing the same kind of business, and watch it happen again in another 15 years. Or I could do something that scared me a lot more than losing a business ever did. I put the $20,000 in my account, packed one bag, and got on a plane to Yogyakarta. No job lined up. No plan beyond the first few weeks. Just a vague, almost embarrassing idea that I'd figure it out when I got there. I want to be honest about something most stories like this leave out. I wasn't brave. I was out of options that felt good, so I chose the option that felt uncertain instead. From where you're sitting, watching this, those two things might look the same. They are not. The first place I rented was 6 million rupiah a year. Do the math, and that's less than $15 a week. A 2-bedroom house with no hot water and no real plumbing to speak of. Bucket showers, a squat toilet, a single ceiling fan that worked when it felt like it. I'd lived rough before, on and off, so the heat and the basics didn't rattle me the way they might rattle someone stepping off a plane from an air-conditioned life for the first time. What rattled me was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind where you lie on a thin mattress at 11 at night, listening to a gecko somewhere in the roof, wondering if you've just made the biggest mistake of your life. For the first few months, honestly, nothing happened. I wasn't building anything. I was just there, learning how the city breathed, learning which warung down the lane sold the fried rice that didn't upset my stomach, learning that just now, in Indonesian time, could mean 5 minutes, or it could mean 5 hours, and there was no way to tell which one you'd got until it happened. Learning to nod along in conversations I only half understood, picking up words the way a child does, by repetition and context rather than any lesson. I spent a lot of that time doubting myself quietly, the kind of doubt you don't say out loud because saying it out loud makes it real. I'd walk past the old furniture workshops near the edge of town, watch the carvers working, and think about the business I'd lost, wondering if I'd thrown away the only thing I was ever actually good at. Then, almost by accident, the phone rang. It was one of my old customers back in Australia, a man I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. He wasn't happy with the new supplier he'd switched to after my business closed. The quality had dropped, the shipping was unreliable, and he wanted to know if I was still in the game. I told him the truth. I was in Indonesia, with no warehouse, no staff, and no capital. He told me that was fine. He just wanted the furniture. One phone call turned into 3. 3 turned into a shipment I put together with borrowed hands and a hired truck. I didn't set out to rebuild the furniture business. It just found me again, except this time I was running it from the other side of the world, with none of the overhead that had sunk me the first time around. Somewhere in that first year, in the middle of chasing down carpenters and negotiating shipping costs I barely understood, I met a woman named Rina. She'd studied in Jakarta, spoke English well enough that we could actually hold a real conversation, and, far more importantly for a man trying to run a business he didn't fully understand the rules of, she understood the parts of this country I never would. When a customs official wanted something done a certain way, when a supplier needed a particular kind of patience, When paperwork needed someone who knew exactly which office to walk into and which one to avoid, she was the reason things worked instead of falling apart. I won't pretend it was some cinematic love story that started with fireworks. It was slower and more practical than that, built over shared meals after long work days and arguments about invoices that somehow turned into something else. But 20 years and 3 kids later, I can tell you it was the best business partnership and the best marriage I never planned for, both arriving at once, disguised as each other. We started small, a rented plot on the edge of the city, a modest build we financed slowly as the furniture orders came back in. I designed the house myself because land here was expensive enough that going up made more sense than spreading out. 2 stories, boundary to boundary, no room left over for a garden except one narrow strip near the pool, big enough for the family that kept growing. Air conditioning eventually went into every room, a long way from the 1 bottle of beer a day I used to ration myself in that first tiny rental, chilling it slowly in an icebox that took the better part of half an hour to do the job properly. There was a stretch, maybe 6 or 7 years in, when it nearly all came apart a second time. A shipment worth almost everything we had went missing in transit. Paperwork error, a port strike. Nobody could tell us exactly what had happened, only that 3 container loads of furniture we'd already been paid a deposit on were sitting somewhere we couldn't locate for the better part of 2 months. I remember Rena and I sitting at the kitchen table with the invoices spread out between us, doing the maths over and over, hoping it would come out different the 5th time we added it up. It didn't come out different. For a while it looked like we might lose everything a second time, in a country where I still couldn't read half the legal documents without her help. What got us through it wasn't luck, and it wasn't some clever business maneuver. It was the neighbors. One of them ran a small transport company and spent 2 days making calls on our behalf, chasing down contacts at the port who owed him favors, refusing any payment for it. Another quietly extended us credit on materials for the guest house we were building at the time, telling us to pay whenever the shipment sorted itself out, not before. Back home, I don't think that happens. Back home, a bank calls in a debt on schedule regardless of what container is or isn't sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Here, people who barely knew me treated the problem like it was partly theirs to help solve. The shipment turned up eventually, damaged but recoverable. Insurance covered most of the loss, and life went back to something like normal. But I never forgot that stretch. It taught me more about where I'd chosen to build a life than any of the good years did. People back home ask me the same question every time I visit. Doesn't it worry you, being so far from everything familiar? And the honest answer is that familiar stopped meaning safe a long time ago. Familiar was a mortgage that ate half my income every month without fail. Familiar was watching a bank make more off my house over 30 years than I ever would. Familiar was the version of my life I'd already tried once in the country I grew up in, and it hadn't worked. Here, the maths are different. Our whole household, 3 kids, staff to help run it, 2 cars, a few motorbikes, runs on somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million rupiah a month in day-to-day costs. No property taxes turning up in the mailbox. No council fees. Electricity for a house this size runs maybe $200 in the hottest months. It's not that money stopped mattering to me. It's that it stopped being the first thing I thought about every single morning, the way it used to. The properties came later. A small guest house we built for renting rooms out to students, 20 of them, almost always full. Rena manages most of it now. It doesn't make us rich, not by any measure that would impress anyone back home. It covers what we need, and we don't owe anyone a single rupiah for any of it. No debt on the house, no debt on the guest house. At 72, that matters to me more than it ever did at 52, when debt just felt like the normal cost of being alive.
I still remember the exact day I understood what I'd actually built here. It wasn't the day the house was finished, and it wasn't the day the guest house hit full occupancy for the first time. It was an ordinary Tuesday, nothing scheduled, nothing to mark it out from any other day. I walked outside to get something from the car and found my youngest daughter in the pool with 2 of the neighbors' kids, splashing and shrieking about something only children find that funny. Our housekeeper was laughing along from the edge of the water. The driver was washing the second car in the driveway, radio playing something in Javanese I still couldn't fully follow. Somewhere behind me, through the open window, I could hear Rena negotiating half in English and half in Indonesian with a supplier on the phone, switching between the two without seeming to notice she was doing it. Nothing dramatic was happening. That was the whole point of it. An entire, ordinary life had grown up around a decision I made at my lowest point, sitting in an empty warehouse with $20,000 to my name and no idea what came next. If you're my age, or getting close to it, and you've got some version of that same restlessness, the sense that you built the safe, sensible life you were supposed to build, and it still isn't quite enough. I'm not going to stand here and tell you to sell your car tomorrow and buy a one-way ticket. That's not really the lesson, and anyone who tells you it's that simple is selling you something. The lesson is smaller and a lot less dramatic than that. The version of your life you're afraid to try is rarely as fragile as it looks from the outside, looking in. I came here with less money than most people spend on a kitchen renovation. No language, no plan, no guarantee that any of it would work, and one very real stretch where it looked like it wouldn't. 20 years later, I have a family I didn't expect, a business that failed once and found its feet a second time, a home with no debt sitting on it, and a life I genuinely would not trade for the one I left behind in that empty warehouse. I think about that warehouse sometimes, more than you'd expect for a place I haven't set foot in for 2 decades. The man locking the door that day, keys in his hand, would not believe what came after. Some days, if I'm honest with myself, neither do I.